Hi, my name is Moriah and I will be responding to Alyssa Odell's claim that comprehensive sexual education programs are the only effective sexual education program for students. Her secondary claims are that 1, comprehensive sexual education reduces teen pregnancies, 2, that it also reduces or it prevents STDs, and lastly that it will normalize sex. So her first secondary claim is that comprehensive sexual education reduces teen pregnancy. She proves this point with a quote from Alice Langford from the National Center for Health Research on how abstinence-only programs are only effective in the short term rather than long-term use. What she fails to do is make the connection of how the short-term lifespan of abstinence-only programs leads to comprehensive sex education reducing teen pregnancies. According to the CDC, this is inaccurate also because states like California have a 15.1 teen pregnancy rate, yet by law only requires abstinence sex education, and a state like Delaware that requires both sex education and HIV education has a higher teen pregnancy rate of 18.5%. And her second point in this claim is that students in states with a lack of sex ed are prone to pregnancies. This is also problematic because, again, this doesn't have any direct correlation to how specifically comprehensive sex education programs decrease teen pregnancy rates. And I would also say the real controversy here is a lack of requirements for sex education in the United States, not whether or not comprehensive sex education is better than abstinence-only programs that has been already proven. And most researchers would agree that abstinence-only programs are actually not as beneficial, so there's not really any controversy there. And from Planned Parenthood Action.org, I found that only 24 out of 50 states, including the District of Columbia, require sex education, and of those, only 13 states actually require the material to be medically accurate. And in 2017, the CDC recorded the teen pregnancy rate with the highest being Arkansas with 32.8%, and the second being Mississippi with 31%. And according to an article by ThoughtCo, both Arkansas and Mississippi don't require any sex education policies at all. And almost half of the 11 states that actually don't require any sex education policies rank in the top 12 of teen pregnancies. So yes, it is true that states with a lack of education programs have higher rates of pregnancies, but this doesn't prove how comprehensive sex education programs specifically lower teen rates. Instead, this just shows that the rate of teen pregnancy is mostly impacted by a lack of sexual education policies in the U.S. as a whole. And her next secondary claim is that comprehensive sex education programs prevent STDs. And she claims that states with high STD rates have high rates because of a lack of comprehensive sex education programs, and states with the low rates have low rates because of this education program. And I found evidence that shows that other factors greatly impact STD rates. For example, the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion maps out other factors, including racial and ethnic disparities. So certain ethnic groups have higher rates rather than rates for white people. So according to the CDC in 2017, the rates for chlamydia for African Americans were 1,175.8 cases out of every 100,000 people, while for white people it was only 420.4 cases out of 100 million. And another factor is poverty rate. So STDs affect disadvantaged people and social networks where high-risk sexual activity is common, and it also states that groups with the highest STD rates are often found to have the most limited access to health services. And her last secondary claim is that comprehensive sex education programs will normalize sex. This claim is problematic because it makes it seem like sex is not normalized in modern culture. So she first points out that sexual education makes sex less taboo. And I found evidence to suggest that sex is not as taboo in this modern culture. According to the American Psychological Association, we live in a sexual hookup culture, and hookups are becoming more ingrained into popular culture, reflecting both evolved sexual predilections and changing social and sexual scripts. And also, according to the APA, around 60 to 80% of North American college students have actually had some sort of hookup experience. And also, the media has also become a large part in sexual education, And then although it's filled with inaccurate portrayals of sexuality, it demonstrates how sex has become really normalized in this part of American culture. And also, according to sociologists from the University of Buffalo, 83% of women are sexualized in media, and of that, 61% of women are actually hypersexualized in media. And all this to say that sex is not as taboo as it used to be years ago. And lastly, she points out that normalizing sex creates a comfortable environment, yet sex is not only normalized in the United States, it is actually hypersexualized. And in this point, she used an example from the Netherlands, and this is not as impactful as she would like it to be because the U.S. actually lacks sexual education policies in general, and the Netherlands, from PBS they in their schools, they start sexual education curriculums as young as kindergarten. So this shows that, her example, the Netherlands cannot apply to the U.S. because sex is normalized, and yet there are still major inconsistencies and issues with sexual education. And in conclusion, Alyssa argued that comprehensive sexual education programs are the only effective sexual education programs for students by stating that 1, they reduce teen pregnancies, 2, they prevent STDs, and 3, they will normalize sex. And these are problematic because there's no real evidence that comprehensive sexual education reduces teen pregnancy rate. And 2, there are other factors like race, access to healthcare, and poverty that factor into the STD rate. And lastly, we live in a very hypersexualized culture that doesn't portray sexual activity accurately. And the real issue is not whether the comprehensive sexual education programs are the only effective program, but rather the lack of sexual education requirements in the U.S. and the subsequent high rates of teen pregnancy and STDs. Thank you.
All right, structurally everything is good. You go after the teen pregnancy thing real early, and you've got kind of these counterclaims. It was not clear to me, excuse me, what California's laws were in comparison to the other states when it comes to sex education. It seemed like you were suggesting that we're only doing abstinence only in California, and that compared to the a state that requires a comprehensive education or does both, that their rates were higher, and so that's just, that eliminates this idea that there is some substantial advantage. But then later on, you say mostly it's been established that comprehensive sexual education is more effective than abstinence. So it seems like there's a little bit of inconsistency that's going on in there. I did think in the summary you did a good job kind of trying to point out what you're making an argument in each of these points, and that is that it's the absence of sexual education at all that creates the biggest problem, and that's the strongest influence on these sorts of things. The limit on the number of states that require it, the problems with the requirements that the states do have about it being medically accurate. I thought those were good challenges. Those might be justifications why we should have comprehensive sex education or abstinence-only education. And I think your point is that it doesn't really distinguish between the two. We need something, is basically what the argument comes out to be. On the STD issue, you suggest that there are other causalities for the STD rates in different groups that has nothing to do with the kind of sex education they get. You mentioned ethnic groups, for instance, and the rates of chlamydia as a comparison. I think that that's a reasonable argument to make. The question would then become, would the education or the sex education be different between those groups? If you've got good reason to believe that they wouldn't be different, that the groups are getting the same kinds of levels of exposure to sex education, then that seems to suggest that there's some cultural issue that's involved there, and that would be a different, kind of counter-causality argument. On the third point, your argument basically comes down to, just denying the notion that sex is not normalized already, and you've got a whole bunch of information that talks about how the media portrays sexuality. We've got a hookup culture that's going on, all that sort of thing. So the idea that there's some big taboo about sex is not really prevalent anymore. By the way, it seems to me like maybe that's we got a counter problem here going the other direction, you know, and maybe the issue is, now the question would be, did sex education programs have any impact on that? Because that could be a negative impact that's going on there. That's not really the point of this particular discussion. You're back to the question, though, of what is causality, and you're suggesting that there's not enough evidence to show the causality is a lack of comprehensive sex education, but it's other things. All right, thank you.